Welcome to Kingdomize, the podcast, where we discuss how to see our lives and our world through a kingdom lens, how to infuse kingdom culture into our families, our workplaces, and our cities, as we all participate in the dream of Jesus to see his kingdom on earth as it is in heaven. So welcome back to Kingdomize, the podcast. It is going to be a fantastic day. So here's what I do when I'm preparing for one of these podcasts. I like to research people and find out their background. And I am so excited about having Billy Kennedy with us today. Ian, you have such amazing friends. Ian Green, I can't even believe the people that you know. It's fantastic. So we are going to have a great day today. You're going to love what you hear. The stories you hear today, not just stories like once upon a time there was this, these are like real stories of the kingdom of God coming in real time. And that's what a solutionary is. We're doing our The Solutionary series, finding revolutionaries that are bringing real answers to real world problems because the kingdom looks like something. It's real people serving a real God with real solutions in real time. And that's amazing. I think I shared this on one of our other podcasts, but the mayor we used to work with in our city, he loved Sir Thomas More's quote. He said, "Lord, give us a good grace to work for the things we pray for." And that's so solutionary. It's like work for the things you pray for. And so we're really glad you're here. Billy Kennedy, we're glad you're here. Man, your resume, I could just read it and our time would be done and that would be it. But senior leader of New Community Church for 20 years, leader of Pioneers International. It's a network of networks. You're the ecumenical canon at the Winchester Cathedral. Every time I say that Winchester Cathedral, the old Beatles song starts playing in my head because everything that happened. President of Churches Together for England from 14 to 19. So many things. We're going to hear a story. So I'm not going to tell your story up front, but so many things that happened in your city, Southampton, UK. So we are so glad you're here, Billy. Thank you for taking the time for being with us today on Kingdomize, the podcast. Ian, what do you want to say to start?
Hey, this is great. You guys, listen, this is going to be awesome. So, Billy, we go back a little while. We've met in person numbers of times. I know we've kind of dialogued on text and emails and whatever. And I think some years ago, maybe 15 years ago, you came and was a guest speaker at the Next Level International conference, the organization that I led at that time. And that dropped some good bombs into the environment. It was shocking for people who were incredibly church-centric to start thinking kingdom-centric. And that left good seed in people's lives. And so I've obviously followed what's going on in Southampton and your journey for decades now, and we're just really thrilled and excited to have you here. And we just love you just to unpack a little bit of your story. Where have you come from, and how have you ended up to where you are even now?
Well, as Brian has said, I've been involved in church ministry for 40 years, senior leadership for the last 20. Again, I moved to Southampton in 1982 and got involved with the church here, where it just been birthed a few years previously as part of the sort of new church restoration movement, with a real passion and vision for the church to become glorious and to transform our communities. And I think we probably got a little bit stuck on trying to make the church more glorious, and then we forgot about the other bit. So I took over the role to lead the church in 2002, and I think that I looked around and thought, we're a good, successful city center church with a big building and good programs and a big budget, but if we didn't exist, would the city feel its impact? And I think I realized that we probably had pulled back a bit from some of that stuff, and so we began to think and pray about how we could be more of a resource to the city and not just keep growing bigger and better and flashier. And so that's been our sort of journey. And we got involved in education in the city. We got involved in fostering and adoption. We got involved in homelessness, refugee and asylum seekers, a very current topic at the moment, and so that we turned the church inside out. And with lots of partners and lots of friends across the city as well, and here we are today where our MP is now a believer, our leader of our council is now a believer, the leader of the opposition party in our city is a believer. And it's just because we turned things around. I think you made a point at the beginning there, Brian, about the kingdom looks like something. And I was reading around that time of thinking that we need to change from Zechariah chapter 8 in the Message version. And it talks about the Lord of the host of heaven's armies returning to Jerusalem, and it'll be a great city to grow up in and a great city to grow old in. And I just thought that's what it looks like. That's what the kingdom of heaven looks like. A great place to grow up and a great place to grow old. So that became our theme for the year, I think 2004-5. And from there we move forward into various activities and projects.
I can say I love the story. I remember when you came in and spent some time with us at the conference, you shared a little bit about how you were drawn into education and became a solution to some really difficult educational needs in the city. I wonder if you could just unpack that a little bit. What drew you in? What happened? I mean, I know there were some miracles. I'd like to hear some of the miracles along the way. Yeah, fantastic.
I mean, I think that I'd begun to see, this whole transition from just being church-centric to being city-centric. One of the things that God spoke to me was around this time saying, I've called you to be a father in the city, not just the church. So what that did for me was help me to see that the problems of the city are not someone else's problems. As a father in the city, they are my problems. So the city announced that they needed to close 4 schools, secondary schools, high schools, 11 to 16-year-olds, and they wanted to open 2 brand new schools. And so they invited people to bid to open the schools, or groups to open the schools. And so in the past, if we were just thinking church, we wouldn't have bothered. But I thought, well, why not? Why don't we put a team together and bid to open these 2 new schools? So I contacted a friend of mine who had already got involved in starting a couple of academies, and we got the local Church of England Education Board involved, and the YMCA, and the some other churches in the city, put a bid together to open 2 brand new schools. We had no background. We'd started a Christian school in 1982, and it's still going today, called the King's School. But it was a school for parents to send their kids to from the church. So this was a different ballgame. This was for a publicly funded school with 600 children in each school, with a Christian ethos. A very, very different vibe. And so basically, we spent 6 months consultation, pitching, and it was obvious we weren't going to win because there was another big bid in the city. And this is where the miracle happened. So our city council has been controlled by a particular party for like 30 years, and this party was backing another bid. So between the consultation and the decision, there was a local election, and the other party, who will remain nameless, won a load of seats. So it was a split council. So there's a third party in British politics that always like sort of hold middle ground, and they held the power because the other 2 parties were equal. And then this one woman from the middle party got upset with the other party and joined the party that hadn't been in power for 30 years, and they formed the council. Well, the person who was then the education spokesperson was on our side. He was a Christian for us. So they awarded us these 2 brand new schools to open. And so we started our journey. So for the next 7 years, I'm operating as the chairman of the board, overseeing the transition from 4 schools to 2 schools, and the building of 2 brand new schools, bringing investment into our city of £34 million. So that was an incredible journey to be able to get into that space. And then we had to work out, well, how do you have a school of Christian ethos where you can't proselytize? So we had to work out how to bring Christ-like values. And so we used the Sermon on the Mount to establish the 9 habits that we want our kids to sort of grow in. But then what it also did was it gave us a seat at the table. in the city. Up to that point, I think we'd always felt as the church, oh, we're on the outside, and we'd prayed against the council and, gone on Jericho walks and all this sort of stuff. And suddenly we're at the table. We have a seat. We are able to influence. And so I met the leader of the council one day, and I said, listen, I see there's some cuts that are being made to the budgets. I said, I've got some ideas to help you. Now I had no ideas. But I thought by the time I get to the meeting, I'll probably have some ideas. So we get to this meeting, and he says to me, so what are your ideas? I said, well, what are the biggest problems? He said, well, where we need help are fostering and adoption, big issue because so many kids are in care. And so the private companies come in, charge double the price, take the kids off us, but we can't afford it. Youth work, aged care in one other area. So I said, well, we'll get the churches to do something. So he said, how is the church organized? I said, well, it's complicated. You've got the evangelicals, Pentecostals, traditionalists. He said, why can't they all come together? I said, well, we've been trying that for years. So what we did is that we formed a new entity called Love Southampton that drew together the crazy pennies, charismatics, evangelicals, and the traditional churches into one forum as a connecting point with our city. And so through Love Southampton, we then recruited, I think 40 new families to foster and adopt in the city. We took responsibility for a number of youth work projects across the city. We engaged in a new program called Communicare that was supporting the elderly. And so we just began to work together as the church in the city because we were already doing a lot of stuff. And so but we just needed a connecting point. So Love Southampton became that connecting point for us. And so education, we then began to work on homelessness. We created a charter with the city on homelessness. Food poverty, obviously the big issue in the UK with these food banks. And so we've got a coordinated food program now across all the churches. So that rather than an individual church doing their thing, to be able to collate it so that when you talk to the council, you're bringing the whole picture. And so I think in the last 20 years, our positioning in the city and our reputation as the church has changed dramatically, which again, I'm sure is not just unique to Southampton, but many other cities in the UK are on a similar journey. So yeah, that's been our journey. And then I stepped down from leading the board at the Oasis Academies after 7 years, thinking I needed to create some space for myself. And then there was a need for another school in the city, in the deprived inner city, for a primary school. So my friend said, "Shall we do it?" I said, "Yeah, let's go for it." So we put another consortium together and won the bid from the DFE, the Department for Education, to open another school called Hope Community School, which is currently now in its 7th year. We have got 54% of the children have English as an additional language. It's very much in the deprived inner city. And the school meets in the church building, Central Hall, which isn't the ideal solution, but it's created a strong connection and has provided a rental income for the church, which is fantastic. And so we are in the process of moving out to a brand new purpose-built building, hopefully opening in 27. So yeah, it's been fun. It's been a fun few years of seeking to see our city become a good place to grow up and a good place to grow old.
I've probably told that story numerous times, but not as well. And I may have embellished some of it, but I am a preacher, so you're allowed to do that, right? But
yeah, I heard you had 100 schools, so this is surprising. You said 100. No, I'm kidding. That never happened.
For me, again, the reality of what you've been able to do is better than the fluff that's out there, really, because it's as we spoke at the beginning of this podcast, so what does it look like for the kingdom to come? And you articulated that really, really well. I'd like to know a little bit about the inner shift inside of you, the feelings, the emotions, the mindset, maybe even the theology of when you actually had the sense that actually I need to be a father to the city. and not just a pastor of my church?
Well, I think that I took on the role to lead the church 2002, and 2004 we had a bit of a trauma in the church where the former senior pastor, who was still around, basically his marriage failed and they moved away. So we were in a bit of a crisis moment anyway, and I took a bit of a sabbatical after 2 or 3 years of trying to navigate through all of the chaos that had been caused, and just began to think we do need like a fresh impartation of vision. So I went back to what should that or could that be? And as I say, we were a large successful church, but I think for me it was looking again at the creation mandate. So theologically, what was Adam's mandate? It was to bring order to all of creation, and that's what the whole thing was about. But we ended up getting into in our evangelical world that the goal is souls and getting them to heaven, and that becomes it. So everything else, I was brought up in a more conservative evangelical environment, and it was even worse in that context. So and that song we used to sing, and the things of earth grow strangely dim. Well, that's what happened. We had no interest in anything apart from getting souls saved and getting them to heaven. So I remember thinking, well, if that's the point, we may as well shoot people the minute they make a commitment to Christ. If that's the goal, then they'll get there quicker. So I think for me, theologically, I came to understand that the goal was not getting people to heaven, it was getting heaven to earth. Revelation 21, we don't go to heaven, heaven comes to earth. And so how does that look now? If that's what we're called to do, in line with Adam's mandate, Adam and Eve's mandate, to bring order to creation, that Israel tried and failed, Adam tried and failed, and Jesus came to show us the way. And so to take the promises in Christ that is about bringing order and the flourishing of humanity, that's what we're about. So that was the internal shift that took place. Now, the default in many church contexts is back to the old. I find frustrating. It's hard to break people out of that, because what we're doing is not producing bottoms on seats on a Sunday morning. But we got a couple of doctors who started a surgery, Kingdom-based surgery, with 45,000 patients now who get prayed for whenever they visit. We've got 3 schools in our city with every year we've got almost 2,000 children going through our schools, learning the way of Jesus. And so we just have to think and count differently. I remember being in a big city in the States once and driving around with this pastor, and he's going, well, this church here, there's 40,000. That church there's 20,000. This church is 25,000. I remember going home that night and Googling for crime rate in America. That city was the biggest, Child poverty, that city was the highest. Teenage pregnancy, that city was the highest. I just thought, well, what are the Christians doing then? What are they doing? They're turning up on Sundays, but obviously not engaging in the real issues of the day. So that is where my internal shift took place, where I could no longer settle for simply seeing souls saved. Now that to some sounds heretical. Obviously, we're still involved in that part, but that's the beginning of the discipleship process. That's not the end, it's the beginning. We see people saved, we disciple them to become contributors in society, to see the transformation of their communities. So that's the process. And so it's the beginning, but it can't be the end. And so to unlock the gifts, the talent, the calling in individual lives, to see them engaging in our city, which is why now I'm so thrilled to see, the whole thing about a great place to grow up. At one point, we had the head of parenting for the city was part of the church. We had the cabinet member responsible for children and education part of the church. So as we began to teach this stuff, people began to understand that they had a part in the church's calling. We had a couple in our church who ran preschool nurseries, and every week they'd be looking after 1,000 kids. I remember on Sundays, we would never talk about it. So I just thought that's got to change. So, we got them up, we prayed for them. And I went to visit their centers a few times. And they said to me, what we're doing is part of the church's mission. So I think what began to happen is that we were empowering people with our teaching to say, you have a part to play in the transformation of our community by what you're doing in your workplace, whether you're a business person or a preschool nursery provider or a politician or a council worker. And I think that shift then began to take place in people's thinking, where they saw that they had a part to play. And it wasn't just about the leaders. So I think for me, I had to model it by being very upfront and public about what I was doing, but it gave people permission then to be able to engage in whatever sphere God had called them to. So, that the head of public health is part of our church. People then saw they had a contribution to make. And it wasn't just about stewarding on a Sunday or running a home group, as good as those things are, but they had a calling from God to bring transformation to the city through their work as much as anything.
So you're equating, if I heard you correctly, you're equating city transformation now with a Genesis mandate for bringing order. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Love that. And is that how you word it so you're speaking outside, talking about your story? Is that what people are gravitating to? Because people do want Christians, leaders, they do want a theological grounding to go, this transformation stuff. Because you had talked earlier about I'm going to call it the crazy charismatics and the crusty conservatives. That's what I call it. The fact of bringing them together, because that's the church, like bringing them together, they all want a theological grounding. So if you could just share that a little bit more, just go a little bit deeper on that, because it's really, really good.
Well, I think that I call it the big story, or theologians call it the meta-narrative. And I can remember growing up evangelical and thinking, what's the point of the Old Testament? Because we should only begin really with Jesus. So if there's a point, what's the point? And so I think that's what I began to see, is that Adam was placed in the garden by God with a mandate to bring about order, to create community, to bring about human flourishing. Adam failed. And so God set in a master plan called Abraham. And through Abraham and the people of Israel, the plan was that they would then be the ones who would bring order and human flourishing and develop a community. But they failed. And so Jesus is the fulfillment to say, okay, all that these two, humanity and Israel, had failed, Christ comes to get us all back on track again. So to restore us with God, to restore us to each other, and then to equip his people, his church, as it says in Ephesians chapter 3, that through the church, then the manifold wisdom of God is made known. And so that was always the purpose, that we as God's people should make known to the powers and the principalities and the people the wisdom of heaven, or the kingdom of heaven. And I think, to me, that's where I think we then get locked into atonement theory and personal salvation, rather than getting the bigger story. And so heaven comes to earth in Revelation 21, and pain's gone, suffering is gone, tears have gone, because it's been fulfilled in Christ. And so I think in Christ, all of the promises that God gave are yes and amen, right back to the time of the creation promises. So that would be my sort of journey to get people to see that this is what we're called to. And history shows us, particularly for us in the UK, it's Christians, the church, throughout centuries have brought incredible transformation to society.
Yes.
And they've engaged in everything from legislation in Parliament to making sure little boys don't go up chimneys, to animals in mines in terrible conditions, to penal reform, to schools. Everything has been motivated by people's faith to see the kingdom of heaven come to earth. And I think, to me, that's where hope comes, is that we can see potential for light to break through in darkness. And at the moment, we need that today more than ever, don't we, as well? So
we do.
So yeah, so it's my big story understanding.
I love that big story. Ian asked a question earlier, and I want to go a little deeper on this if we can, about your journey from we're building a church, we've got a good church in the downtown city center, to how are we affecting the city? If we weren't here, would anyone know about it? What was happening at that time in terms of like who were you listening to? What were you reading? What again, this idea of we want to take some people on a journey to go, here's some stories, here's why, here's some place to get your teeth into. What was happening at the time? Who were you reading or talking to at the time?
Well, I mean, I am during my sabbatical, I went to the States. I went to visit Rob Bell's church in Grand Rapids. So obviously, this is before he left and went west. But he was doing some good stuff. I mean, he shared something of the big story that really inspired me. There's a guy in the UK called Steve Chalk who again has gone a bit west in some of his thinking, but what he's doing in regards to transformation is phenomenal. I'd also been inspired by the guys at Bethel, the sort of crazy charismatics and their kingdom view as well. So I think I've got this very eclectic mix of people. Early reading of Tony Campolo back in the day was very inspiring to me. So I think I just began to find myself getting inspired by a load of different people. I then went, my background's Irish. I went to Ireland and did some research around the Celtic Christianity, and that inspired me. That the monastic movements of the 5th, 6th, 7th century and how they really were the community changers of their day, community formers of their day. So the whole bunch of people and things and backgrounds. I think the Methodist movement in the UK has inspired me. I think what was interesting is that Wesley spent 50 years preaching the gospel, making disciples, and they had 72,000 members by the time he died. But he then also inspired a whole bunch of evangelical Anglicans, including Wilberforce and others. So at that time in the UK, you couldn't have a vote if you weren't Anglican. So it was important that he inspired those people because they had influence. And so the Clapham Sect, for example, all Anglicans, because they were the only people who could have any influence. So his influence on them resulted in then this transformation of society. And so you had this grassroots discipleship movement going on. You had the people of influence doing their bit. And so within 100 years of Wesley's death, there were over 1 million Methodists. So that continued. But Britain was transformed, both with legislation and with action. And so I think that's where, for me, that was a very inspiring read. So it was both current people who are a bit on the edge and some of our historical precedents that really inspired me.
Yeah, so good. A couple of the things that you had said along the way there that I wanted to press in a little bit to is you started by talking about you had a good glory church, and we don't want to go away from the glory. We want the presence of God, right? And
Absolutely.
the challenging piece that we experience, that we've had chats with others, is that how do you keep that glory / fire on the altar, so to speak, but also and the city transformation piece, because most Christians gravitate to one or the other, right?
Yeah.
So I'd be curious to hear a little bit of that.
I mean, I think it's about understanding the goal of the discipleship. So I remember being at one conference of I won't say where it was, but it was a pastor from a larger church, and he was talking about the discipleship pathway. And so the first 3 steps are very good, but then the goal became finding a role to serve in church.
Yeah.
That became the goal. So a parking attendant, a home group leader, part of the worship team. So that became the goal. Now that to me that's not part that isn't the goal. That's just what we do. That's if you're in a family you serve. And so I think to be able to lift people's eyes to see that, as I've said, in line with Ephesians chapter 3, the goal is to bring the wisdom of heaven to creation. That to me has to be the goal, that we get people to a place of maturity so that they're contributors in the bigger picture. Now, they may then make the tea on a Sunday or do whatever. That's fine. That's not the goal. The goal is to enable them to discover who God has called them to be, and what aspect of the multifaceted wisdom of God are they called to reflect in their place. And that could be a stay-at-home mum, or that could be the leader of our city council. I think that's what we need to all discover. Which aspect of the wisdom of heaven has God called me to reflect and go and do that. So I think for me, if the fire doesn't keep burning, you're not going to have new people coming through to join the journey. So it's ensuring that the journey is towards the ultimate goal and they don't stop off halfway through.
Yeah.
That's great. That's great, Billy. I mean, like for me, this is a new journey for me. Like I'm probably just 15 years into it. I was, for 35 years, I was just obsessed with getting people into heaven, right? That was my obsession, church planting, training leaders across Europe, blah, 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 and then I became quite discouraged with some of the outcomes. We would say, let's take the city. Actually, what we meant was, let's get as many bums on seats as we could. That's what we actually, that was the reality of the issue, And then when I had the ha-ha moment, like you've already described about, it's not about getting people to heaven, it's about getting heaven down to earth. I think in my early journey and getting the revelation, I was not very articulate in explaining what that meant to particularly my pastoral friends that felt I'd fallen off the edge of the planet and I'd gone into rank heresy or something, So like with the networks that you lead, pioneer and numbers of countries around the world are they embracing the heart of what you're sharing with us today?
I think I would say probably in some of the more developing nations, that is a harder one to really get through to them. I think in the Western nations, I think people do get that, and I think because there's a lot of communication about it, a lot of bandwidth is given to it these days. So I think in some of the African nations and Asian nations, it's still very much old school in that sense of the revival context, the big missions, the crusade, and so it's about plugging away. I keep saying to them, I don't need big platforms. When I come, we'll build slowly and steadily. And you've seen the offerings you get in some of these places where they'll give you a platform with 10,000 people, and it looks good on your Facebook page, but it has no meaning. It has no consequence. So people get seduced by that rather than going, no, it's still applicable to them. And so I talk a lot in those contexts about bringing the church to maturity, which is about when you mature, you're able to give. So not looking to the West for all your supply, trusting God, and then being the influence in society that you're meant to be. So, I think that we keep plugging away, but it is definitely different in some of those contexts.
I mean, it's been a journey for us all, and I think, like, I've got patience. Like, I got patience because it took me 35 years for the lights to go on,
Yeah.
So I'm not expecting to win anybody over in 3 sermons and a seminar.
Absolutely.
But no, that's really, I mean, that would be a part of my experience too, in terms of we have such, a strong view of reformational theology. I don't mean Calvinism. I mean, the story of redemption is just for the individual. We would often talk on this platform that we would say, the gospel of salvation is Mark 16, verse 15, but the gospel of the kingdom is Matthew 28, 19 and 20, where one is for the individual, but one is for society. And I think when you've been baptized in a particular line of thought, we're all slow to change, aren't we? And we just have to encourage. I just love that. What you're doing. I mean, the roots of the house church movement it was strong on kingdom, but it was quite strong on worship, and they wouldn't have used the term revival, right? There was definitely a revival fervor
Yes.
in that movement.
Yes, yes. Well, I mean, when I turned up in 1982, the church had been going for 4 or 5 years at that point. Already, they had started a school. Two doctors had started some surgeries or a surgery on a very needy housing estate. They'd begun to work with people with AIDS. So already, because of the kingdom teaching in those early Bible week time, they began to embrace that. I think it felt to me that it shifted when we acquired a big building in the city centre in the late 80s. And I think there's a shift then took place between our goal has been like engaging in kingdom projects, but now it's about filling a building. I think that was the sort of shift that took place. And, we did that quite successfully. But I think that the other things sort of took sort of like a back seat. So, but it was then this could be revival, and then for those of us in the UK, the Toronto era of the mid-90s, we were definitely going to be in revival by the end of the decade, but it didn't really happen, and that's when I think people then got a little bit disillusioned, didn't they? So, but where do we go from there? And I think to me that's where there was an energy came during those years, but what was the energy for? And even like revival is to bring something back to life to fulfill its original purpose. Well, what's the original purpose? That's where I think, and today I hear the next wave of comments about revival. I'm going, well, revival for what? Of what?
Yeah. Really good. Yeah, if you need to be revived, you should be revived, but don't stop.
Don't stop. No, exactly. You get revived to do what you were originally birthed to do.
Love that. That's a great way to say that. I love that. So you've talked already a little bit about this, Billy, but talk a bit about the future and why you're optimistic. Like, why are you say you're hearing a bit of the rumbling of the kingdom-centric message. Like, what are you thinking about the future? What needs to happen? Maybe you're not optimistic. Maybe I'm leading the witness, but what do you think?
It depends. If I spend too much time listening to the news, I get less optimistic these days.
It's a sign. Be careful.
But then I'm optimistic because I come across people all the time who you have never heard of and you will never hear of. And they are in incredible positions of influence in our communities, in our cities, business leaders and bank executives. And honestly, time I go to London, I meet someone different who's doing some incredible things. So I think there are what is positioning his Josephs and his Daniels all over the place that we are not aware of. And I think that we need to rejoice about that. I think I am optimistic in a sense of there is a growing sense of encouragement at the conversion discipleship end, but let's hope that they move through. I am optimistic because a lot of those young people who we were praying over and prophesying over 25 years ago are now fulfilling, like I said, the person who's our local MP. I was in a meeting early 2000s and God spoke to me and said, Darren Paffy, MP, why not? And today he's our MP.
Beautiful. Fantastic.
That took 20 years. So and that's happening in lots of places. So I just hope that the message of transformation has been sown in people's lives. And as they are now getting into positions of influence in the workplace, they're recognizing that God has placed them in those places. So I think that's what I see. I think, there's lots of huge challenges when some of the stuff is politicized. And so if you make one statement, you're seeing as woke. And if you make another statement, you're seeing as being right wing. And it's like, gosh, it's like,
We like coming near the end of things and talking about optimism because I would say we think that solutionaries are optimistic. It's not like you don't see the challenges. It's not like you don't see the challenges in society. You just believe God has an answer for them. So how do you rise above that? There's no prize for the critic, right? There's no prize to go, oh, look at that. That's bad. Okay, well done. You saw something bad. How do you change it? How do you bring the solution, right? So,
Exactly.
Yeah. So if people want to get a hold of you, Billy, how do they do it? You've got a book, Generations. You're a story of 50 years. When's your next book coming out as well? Like, I feel like you've got books in you. So no pressure. How do they get a hold of you?
Well, I am thinking about writing something on the apostolic because I think it's got various connotations in various circles. And I think
Yeah.
something around the apostolic role, both in church and society, I think is an important.
Yeah, well, that goes back to your statement earlier about fathering the city, right? That is what that looks like. So
yeah, exactly.
So your book's out. They can get it on Amazon. They can get a hold of
Yeah.
you still through the group that you lead, the Pioneer International.
Pioneer International, yeah.
Yeah, so amazing. Ian, anything you want to wrap up with? Any thoughts you have?
No, this was just such a comprehensive overview of probably all of our hearts, and hopefully we'll plant lots of good seed into our listeners, because this has just been quite phenomenal today, Billy.
Thank you.
You've managed to articulate so well the journey that many of us have been on for many years, but I think you're further down the track than a lot of us. And we appreciate your wisdom, appreciate your counsel, appreciate you actually walking the walk, because, you know, there's been many winds, no doubt, that have tried to knock you off course, but you've stayed the course. And
Thank you.
and we're absolutely blessed because of that. And not only is Southampton blessed, but that whole network of churches are blessed that you were leading. So fantastic, absolutely fantastic.
Thanks so much.
I mean, we want to, again, I can't remember if we said at the beginning, but want to thank you again for endorsing our book, Just Kingdomize It. That was really kind what you said. And I guess this hour now that we've had together was a lot more substance behind your endorsement, which is fantastic. And I don't know how we can serve you or your networks or wherever, but we do have a Just Kingdomize It 3-hour seminar. We can do it in person. We can do it in line. It's created in a way that people are leaning in. So we're not at the point where we want to debate. You know, we're at the point where if people are leaning in, then we want to put fuel on the fire. We want to increase their appetite for more of the kingdom.
If you're listening today and you would see our book or what we're doing could help you, we are definitely here for that as well. Thanks for listening today. Hey, why don't you hit that like button, subscribe, send this off to somebody else. It will definitely be helpful to others as well. People that you know are leaning in as well, but could use some help to hear another story, another foundational scripture that would go, yeah, that makes sense. Maybe it's a piece they need to go to the next level of city transformation and being a solutionary as well. So thanks for joining us today. We'll see you again next week on Kingdomize, the podcast. Thanks for joining us today on Kingdomize, the podcast. Let's keep the discussion going throughout the week on our socials or on our website, kingdomizeglobalcom. Contact us today to see how we can walk together to see more of God's kingdom in your city as it is in heaven.